The morning bell rang across Kepler Station, and students from dozens of different worlds hurried through the metal corridors toward their classes. Jake Morrison walked at his usual steady pace, his worn leather notebook tucked under one arm. He was the only human in Professor Vext's advanced engineering class, something that had stopped bothering him months ago. The classroom was a mix of beings that still amazed Jake even after 2 years at the Galactic Engineering Academy. Tall, gray-skinned Xanthari sat in perfectly straight rows, their 4 arms already arranging tools and calculators with machine-like precision. The crystalline quartz students hummed softly to each other in frequencies that made Jake's teeth ache. Near the back, a cluster of insectoid hive minds clicked and chittered in their rapid collective language. Jake took his usual seat in the middle row and pulled out his pen. Around him, translation devices buzzed and whirred his different species. Prepared for class in their own ways, Professor Vexti entered the room with his characteristic swift stride. His blue skin shimmered under the artificial lights, and his 4 eyes swept across the classroom with the calculating gaze of someone who had been teaching for over 300 years. "Today we begin your final project," he announced, his voice carrying easily through the room's acoustic system. "This assignment will count for 40% of your grade and will determine who among you truly understands the principles of engineering we have studied this semester." The room fell silent except for the soft humming of the quartz students, which seemed to be their version of nervous energy. Professor Vexti activated the main display screen. A simple image appeared showing a basic tower structure. "Your task is straightforward. You must design and build a communication tower capable of transmitting data across a planetary surface. The tower must demonstrate maximum efficiency while using minimal resources." Jake leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued. Around him, his classmates began the familiar routines of their species when faced with a new challenge. The Xanthari immediately pulled out their calculation devices and began working through equations. Their methodical approach to problems was legendary throughout the galaxy. They would spend days calculating the optimal height, power output, and material requirements before building anything. The quartz students increased their humming, creating harmonics that Jake had learned meant they were discussing frequency optimization and signal clarity. Their crystalline bodies were natural resonators, making them excellent at understanding wave mechanics. The hive minds began their rapid clicking conversations, each individual contributing to a collective solution that would emerge from their group consciousness. They rarely built anything alone, preferring designs that emerged from multiple minds working as one. But Jake sat quietly, his pen tapping gently against his notebook. Something about the assignment felt different to him, though he could not yet put his finger on what it was. Professor Vexti continued his explanation. "You have 6 weeks to complete this project. Your tower will be tested for range, power efficiency, signal clarity, and durability. The student with the most effective design will receive the Galactic Engineering Excellence Award." A Xanthari student named Zara raised one of her 4 arms. "Professor, are there restrictions on the tower's height or power source?" "Only those imposed by physics and available materials," Vexti replied. "The goal is efficiency, not excess. A tower that uses 10 times the power to achieve twice the range is not efficient." Another student, a massive Brutarian named Clax, spoke in his rumbling voice. "What about environmental factors? Weather, interference, terrain? Excellent question. Your tower must function reliably under normal planetary conditions. This includes storms, electromagnetic interference, and geographic obstacles." Jake raised his hand slowly. Professor Vexti's upper 2 eyes focused on him while his lower 2 continued scanning the rest of the class. "Yes, Morrison?" "Professor, when you say build a tower, are we limited to a single structure? Or could we interpret the assignment more broadly?" The question caused a ripple of confusion through the classroom. Several Zenthari students turned to look at Jake with expressions that clearly indicated they thought he was missing something obvious. Professor Vextai's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of puzzlement among his species. The assignment is quite clear, Morrison. You are to build a communication tower. One structure. What else would you possibly need? Jake nodded slowly, but his mind was already racing down a different path. I understand, Professor. Just wanted to make sure I had the parameters right. Very well. Are there any other questions? When no one else spoke, Professor Vextai dismissed the class. Students immediately began forming groups and discussing their approaches. The Zenthari clustered together to share calculations. The court students harmonized their planning songs. The hive minds merged into their collective planning formation. Jake gathered his things slowly, lost in thought. As he walked toward the door, Zara approached him. Morrison, you seem troubled by this assignment. It is quite straightforward for a species that has mastered interstellar travel. Jake paused and looked at her. That's just it, Zara. Sometimes the most straightforward problems have the most interesting solutions. Interesting? She tilted her head in the way Zenthari did when they encountered unfamiliar concepts. This is engineering, not art. There is an optimal solution based on mathematics and physics. We simply need to calculate it. Jake smiled. Maybe, but humans learned a long time ago that sometimes the best answer isn't the most obvious one. He left Zara standing in the corridor, her 4 arms gesturing in confusion as she tried to understand what he meant. That evening, Jake sat in his small dormitory room, staring at the assignment parameters on his computer screen. Around him, the sounds of the station's nighttime operations hummed through the walls. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the court students practicing their harmonic exercises, but Jake was thinking about home. He was remembering stories his grandfather had told him about the early days of human communication networks on Earth. Not the massive broadcast towers that could reach across continents, but the smaller networks that connected communities. The internet that had started as a few computers sharing information and had grown into something that linked every human on the planet. His grandfather had been an engineer too, back when humans were just figuring out how to connect their world. He used to say that the secret was not building the biggest tower, but building the right connections. Jake pulled out his notebook and began to sketch. Not a tower reaching toward the sky, but something else entirely. Something his classmates would probably think was crazy. Something that might just change everything. The assignment said to build a tower for maximum efficiency with minimal resources. But it did not say anything about how many components that tower could have. It did not say the tower had to be a single structure reaching toward the clouds. Jake smiled as he worked on his sketches late into the night. His grandfather would have been proud. The humans were about to teach the galaxy a new way to solve old problems. The engineering workshop buzzed with activity as students began working on their tower projects. Massive construction sounds echoed through the vast space as cranes lifted steel beams and welding torches sparked against metal joints. The Zenthari students had calculated their optimal tower height at exactly 437 meters, and they worked with their usual precise efficiency to make it happen. Clax, the Brutarian student, was building something that looked more like a fortress than a communication tower. His massive hands shaped metal beams as if they were clay, creating a structure that could probably survive a direct asteroid impact. The other Brutarian students gathered around him, grunting approval at his design's raw power. The court students had chosen a completely different approach. Their tower grew like a crystal formation, each piece resonating with perfect harmonic frequencies. When they tested their signals, the entire workshop filled with beautiful musical tones that made everyone stop and listen. But in the far corner of the workshop, Jake Morrison was doing something that made no sense to anyone watching. Instead of reaching toward the ceiling with steel and concrete, he was building small boxes, Dozens of them. Each one stood barely 10 feet tall and looked more like a garden shed than part of a communication system. After 3 days of this strange activity, his classmates began to take notice that Zara approached his work area during the afternoon break. Her 4 arms carried calculation tablets covered with equations and diagrams of her own tower design. She looked at Jake's collection of small structures with obvious confusion. "Morrison, your devices lack the height necessary to achieve meaningful transmission range. Basic physics clearly shows that communication distance increases with antenna elevation." Jake looked up from the small device he was assembling. His hands were covered in grease, and electronic components were scattered across his workbench. "You're absolutely right about the physics, Zara. Height definitely helps with range. Then why are you building these tiny structures? They cannot possibly compete with proper towers." Jake wiped his hands on a cloth and gestured toward his growing collection of small boxes. "Because sometimes the best solution is not the most obvious one. Humans learned that lesson a long time ago." He activated a holographic display above his workbench. Instead of showing one massive tower trying to cover a continent, his design showed hundreds of small devices connected by glowing lines of communication. "Each one of these nodes has limited range by itself," Jake explained. "But watch what happens when they work together." He ran a simulation on the hologram. A message started at one node and jumped to the next, then to the next, traveling across the entire network in seconds. The signal moved like water flowing downhill, always finding the best path through the connected devices. Zara studied the display with the intense focus her species was known for. "I see the concept, but it appears highly inefficient. Why build 100 small devices when one large tower can accomplish the same task?" "Because of what happens when things go wrong," Jake replied. He modified the simulation to show several nodes failing randomly. "Watch this." In the hologram, red dots appeared as nodes went offline. But instead of stopping the communication, the network simply found new paths around the failed devices. The message kept flowing, barely slowed by the failures. "Your single tower approach works perfectly until something damages that one tower," Jake continued. "Lightning, storms, equipment failure, even enemy attack. When your tower goes down, all communication stops." Resonance, one of the Quartz students, approached the demonstration. The crystalline being projected skeptical harmonics that Jake had learned to recognize. "This design requires far more materials and energy than a single optimized structure. It violates the efficiency requirement." Jake pulled up another display showing power consumption numbers. "Actually, it does not. Each small node uses very little power because it only needs to reach its nearest neighbors. When you add up the total power for the whole network, it is less than what your big towers consume." More students gathered around Jake's workstation as word spread about his unusual approach. Even some of the hive mind collective detached individuals to observe his demonstration. "There is another advantage," Jake said, warming to his explanation. "My network gets smarter the more it is used." He activated what he called learning protocols in his simulation. As messages traveled through the network, the nodes began to remember which paths worked best for different types of data. They shared this information with their neighbors, and the entire system gradually became more efficient. "Impossible," muttered one of the Zenthari students. "Systems degrade with use. They do not improve." "Human systems do," Jake replied with a smile. "We build networks that learn from experience. Every message that passes through makes the system a little bit better at handling the next one." But Jake was not finished with his demonstration. He activated another protocol he had been working on during late-night sessions in his dormitory. "This is distributed processing," he announced. Suddenly, his network was not just passing messages between nodes. Each device was contributing computing power to solve complex problems, turning the entire communication grid into a massive distributed computer. The gathered students watched in amazement as his network began calculating engineering problems, weather predictions, and resource optimization simultaneously while still handling all its communication duties. Professor Vextai appeared at the edge of the crowd, drawn by the unusual gathering. His 4 eyes fixed on Jake's holographic display with intense interest. "Morrison, explain what you have created here." Jake turned to face his professor. "I started with the assignment to build a communication tower with maximum efficiency and minimum resources. But I realized that efficiency is not just about using less power or fewer materials. True efficiency means the system keeps working even when parts of it fail." He gestured toward the simulation still running above his workbench. "This network can lose half its nodes and still function. It learns from every message and gets better over time. It can even help solve other problems while doing its main job." Professor Vextai studied the display for several long minutes. The workshop had grown quiet as other students stopped their own work to listen. "You were asked to build a tower, Morrison. What you have created appears to be something entirely different." Jake nodded. "Yes, sir, I built something better." The professor's expression was unreadable as he continued to examine Jake's work. Around them, students from different species whispered among themselves in their various languages, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Zara approached Jake after the professor moved on to inspect other projects. "Morrison, I must ask you something. Did your species always think this way? In networks instead of single structures?" Jake considered the question as he returned to assembling another node. "Not always. But humans learned early that survival often depends on cooperation. Our ancestors survived ice ages and predators not because individual humans were strongest, but because we worked together." He picked up another small device and began connecting it to his growing network. "We learned that many small connections are often more valuable than one big one. That systems which help each other are stronger than systems that stand alone." As the day ended and students began cleaning their work areas, Jake's collection of small boxes continued to hum quietly in their corner of the workshop. They looked insignificant compared to the massive towers rising around them, but they were. Already talking to each other, learning, adapting, and growing stronger with every passing moment. Testing day arrived with the sharp sound of the morning bell echoing through Kepler Station. Students gathered in the massive testing chamber, a room large enough to simulate an entire continent. Holographic projectors created mountains, valleys, and weather patterns that would challenge their communication systems under realistic conditions. Professor Vextai stood at the central control station, his 4 eyes scanning the impressive towers that filled the chamber. The Xanthari construction reached toward the artificial sky like a steel needle, its surfaces polished to perfection. Clax's Brutarian tower squatted like a fortress, built to withstand anything the universe could throw at it. The quartz crystal formation sang softly as wind passed through its carefully designed chambers. Jake's network of small boxes looked pathetic in comparison. They scattered across the test area like toys forgotten by a child, each one barely tall enough to reach Jake's shoulder. Several students pointed at his setup and whispered among themselves, clearly wondering how he expected to compete with their magnificent towers. "We will begin testing immediately," Professor Vextai announced. "Each design will be evaluated for transmission range, power efficiency, signal clarity, and structural durability. The results will determine your final grades." The first test belonged to Zara and her Xanthari team. Their tower activated with a deep hum of power, and instantly their signal reached across the entire simulated continent. The display screens showed perfect signal clarity and impressive range measurements. "Excellent work," Professor Vextai noted as he recorded their results. "Maximum range achieved with minimal signal degradation." Clax's Brutarian tower came next. When it powered up, the entire chamber vibrated with raw energy. His signal punched through simulated storms and electromagnetic interference like they were nothing. The professor had to adjust his instruments to handle the massive power output. Impressive durability and signal strength, Vextai commented, though power consumption is significantly higher than optimal. The quartz crystal tower produced the most beautiful test of all. When activated, it filled the chamber with harmonious tones that seemed to carry data on musical waves. Their signal was pure and clear, with almost no interference from environmental factors. Outstanding signal quality, the professor said, clearly impressed. Your species' natural understanding of wave mechanics is remarkable. Other students demonstrated their towers with similar results. Each design showed the strengths of its creator's species and engineering philosophy. The Hive Mind Collective had built something that looked organic, with curved surfaces that seemed to grow rather than being constructed. Their signal pulsed with the rhythm of their group consciousness. Finally, it was Jake's turn. He walked to his control station and looked out at his scattered network of small devices. Around him, he could feel the barely concealed amusement of his classmates. Even Professor Vextai seemed skeptical as he prepared to record what everyone expected to be disappointing results. "Whenever you are ready, Morrison," the professor said. Jake took a deep breath and activated his network. The results were immediate and underwhelming. His signal range from any single node was much shorter than the massive towers. His power output readings looked weak compared to the raw strength of the Brutarian design. Several students chuckled quietly. As expected, Clax rumbled in his deep voice. Humans always make simple problems complicated. But Professor Vextai was studying his instruments more carefully. Something about the readings did not match what he was seeing. "Morrison, your power consumption per unit of coverage area is unusual. Run the test again, but this time extend to maximum range parameters." Jake smiled and activated the full continental simulation. As he did, something remarkable happened. His network began to demonstrate capabilities that none of the single towers could match. While each alien tower could reach impressively far in one direction, Jake's network suddenly illuminated the entire test continent with overlapping coverage zones. The display screens showed communication pathways spreading like a web across every mountain, valley, and plain in the simulation. "Impossible," Zara whispered, staring at her instruments. "His total coverage area exceeds the sum of his individual node ranges." "That is the power of networking," Jake explained. "Each node talks to its neighbors, and they relay the message forward. The signal does not travel from one point to another in a straight line. It travels through the entire community." Professor Vextai began running more sophisticated tests. He simulated equipment failures by randomly shutting down nodes throughout Jake's network. Instead of degrading the system, the network adapted instantly, finding new paths around the failed components. Communication never stopped, even when a third of the nodes went offline. "This is not possible," Resonance projected in confused harmonics. "Systems should fail when components are damaged." "Human systems do not fail," Jake replied. "They adapt." But the most impressive demonstration was yet to come. Professor Vextai activated the chamber's weather simulation system, creating electromagnetic storms that would cripple traditional communication systems. The alien towers began struggling immediately, their signals distorted by the interference. Jake's network responded differently. Instead of fighting the interference, it began adapting to it. The nodes automatically adjusted their frequencies, found clearer channels, and coordinated their efforts to maintain clean communication, even through the artificial storm. "The network is learning," Professor Vextai said, his voice filled with wonder. "It is becoming more efficient in response to challenges." The testing continued for hours. Every challenge the professor threw at the systems revealed new advantages of Jake's approach. When he simulated physical attacks that would destroy traditional towers, the network simply rooted around the damage. When he created communication dead zones that would block normal signals. The network found alternative paths, but the most shocking moment came when Jake activated what he called mesh learning protocols. His network began analyzing the test data, identifying patterns, and sharing successful strategies between nodes. Within minutes, the system was performing better than its original specifications. "It is evolving," one of the Hive Mind Collective observed. "The network grows stronger through use rather than weaker." Professor Vex Tai ran one final test. He activated the chamber's full disaster simulation, combining electromagnetic storms, physical destruction, and massive interference all at once. The conditions were severe enough that most of the alien towers shut down completely to prevent damage. Jake's network took the punishment and kept working. Nodes failed, signals were blocked, and entire sections went dark. But the network adapted, learned, and continued to provide communication across the entire continent. When the simulation ended, the system was actually running more efficiently. Then when it started, the testing chamber fell silent except for the quiet humming of Jake's network. Students from 12 different species stared at the displays, showing performance numbers that seemed impossible. A communication system that got better under stress rather than worse. A network that could lose half its components and still function perfectly. Professor Vex Tai studied his instruments for a long time before speaking. "Morrison, what you have created is not just a communication tower. It is something entirely different." Jake nodded, still watching his network as it continued to optimize itself. "Yes, sir. It is a community." The professor's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he processed this statement. Around them, alien students whispered in their various languages, trying to understand what they had witnessed. The human had been asked to build a tower, and instead he had built something that challenged their basic understanding of how technology should work. As the session ended and students began powering down their systems, Jake's network continued its quiet humming. It had proven itself not through brute force or elegant design, but through something uniquely human. The understanding that many small parts working together could achieve things that no single large part ever could. The towers around it were impressive monuments to their creators' engineering skills. But Jake's network was something more. It was a demonstration of how humans saw the world, not as a collection of competing individuals, but as a community where everyone helped everyone else succeed. Word of Jake's network spread through Kepler Station like wildfire. Within hours of the testing demonstration, engineering students from other classes began crowding into the testing chamber to see the impossible system for themselves. Faculty members who had been teaching for centuries arrived, with skeptical expressions that quickly changed to amazement. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the human head of Galactic Engineering Studies, received an urgent message during her morning coffee. The brief report from Professor Vex Tai was filled with technical terms she had never seen combined before. Adaptive network topology, self-healing communication pathways, distributed learning algorithms. She set down her cup and headed straight for the testing chamber. Jake stood beside his control station, patiently explaining his network to a group of crystalline students who had never seen anything like it. Their harmonic frequencies showed confusion and wonder in equal measure. "The key is that each node does not try to do everything by itself," Jake was saying. "It focuses on talking to its neighbors and helping them succeed. When every node helps its neighbors, the whole network becomes stronger." Dr. Rodriguez approached quietly, observing the demonstration without interrupting. She had known Jake for 2 years, ever since he had arrived at the academy as part of the first human exchange program. He had always been a good student, but nothing had prepared her for what she was witnessing. Professor Vex Tai noticed her arrival and gestured toward the network displays. "Dr. Rodriguez, your student has created something that challenges our fundamental understanding of communication systems." "Show me," she said simply. Jake activated a new demonstration he had prepared overnight. This time, instead of just showing communication pathways, he revealed the network's ability to process information collaboratively. Each node contributed a small amount of computing power, and together they solved complex engineering problems in real time. "Watch this," Jake said. He fed the network a structural engineering problem that would normally require a powerful computer to solve. The calculation distributed across his nodes, with each device handling a small piece of the puzzle. The answer appeared in seconds. "Distributed processing," Dr. Rodriguez breathed. "You have turned your communication network into a supercomputer." "Not just a supercomputer," Jake corrected. "A supercomputer that gets smarter every time it is used. Each calculation teaches the network how to handle similar problems more efficiently." But Jake was not finished. He activated another protocol that he had been working on during sleepless nights in his dormitory room. Suddenly, his network was not just communicating and calculating. It was monitoring the entire testing chamber, analyzing environmental conditions, and predicting optimal communication strategies before problems occurred. "Predictive adaptation," he explained to the growing crowd of observers. "The network learns from patterns in the data. It can predict when interference is coming and adjust before the problem affects communication." A Xanthari professor named Dr. Keffer pushed through the crowd, her 4 arms carrying multiple data tablets. She had been studying communication theory for over 200 years and had never seen anything that violated established principles so completely. "This is impossible," she declared, staring at the performance metrics. "Communication systems degrade with complexity. Adding more components should make the system less reliable, not more reliable." Jake turned to face her, his expression patient but confident. "That is true for systems where each component works alone. But in a network where components help each other, complexity becomes strength." He ran another demonstration, this time simulating a massive communication load that would overwhelm any single tower. Instead of failing, his network distributed the load across all available nodes. The more stress he put on the system, the more efficiently it operated. "Each node learns from the experience and shares that knowledge," Jake explained. "When one node finds a better way to handle a signal, it teaches that method to its neighbors. The knowledge spreads through the entire network in minutes." Dr. Keffer studied her instruments in silence. Every measurement contradicted what she thought she knew about communication engineering. How is the knowledge shared? What prevents conflicts when different nodes learn different approaches? "Democracy," Jake replied with a smile. "When nodes disagree about the best approach, they test both methods and vote on which works better. The network collectively decides which techniques to adopt." The crowd of observers had grown to include students and faculty from across the station. Even administrators who rarely left their offices had come to see what was causing such excitement in the engineering department. Professor Vextai activated the chamber's most challenging test scenario. He combined every type of interference, failure, and stress that the system could generate. The conditions were so severe that they exceeded anything a real-world communication system would ever face. Jake's network took the punishment without hesitation. Nodes failed, connections were severed, and entire sections went dark. But instead of degrading, the network evolved. It developed new routing strategies, discovered alternative communication methods, and actually improved its performance under the extreme conditions. "Impossible," Dr. Keffer whispered, watching her instruments display numbers that made no sense according to traditional theory. "Not impossible," Dr. Rodriguez said quietly. "Just human." She stepped forward to address the crowd that had gathered around Jake's demonstration. "What you are witnessing represents a fundamental difference in how humans approach problems compared to other species." The room fell silent as the senior human administrator continued. "Most species optimize individual components. They build the strongest tower, the most efficient transmitter, the most powerful processor. Humans optimize relationships between components. Jake nodded as his former professor spoke. We learned early in our history that survival depends on cooperation. A human alone in the wilderness dies quickly, but humans working together can survive anything. Dr. Rodriguez gestured toward the network, still humming quietly as it handled the extreme test conditions. This is not just technology, it is philosophy. Jake has built a system that embodies human values. Individual nodes sacrifice efficiency to help their neighbors. The network prioritizes collective success over individual performance. Professor Vextai studied the displays showing the network's continued operation under impossible conditions. Dr. Rodriguez, what are the implications of this approach? Could this technology be scaled to larger systems? Before she could answer, Jake spoke up. Professor, this network could be expanded to cover multiple planets, entire star systems, or even the whole galaxy. The principles do not change. More nodes mean more redundancy, more processing power, and more collective intelligence. The implications hit the gathered observers like a physical force. A communication network that spanned the galaxy and got stronger with every new planet that joined. A system that could survive the destruction of entire star systems and continue operating. A network that would learn and evolve with each species that contributed to it. Dr. Keffer set down her data tablets and stared at Jake with something approaching awe. You have not just built a communication system. You have designed the foundation for a true galactic civilization. Jake looked around at the faces surrounding him, seeing understanding dawn in eyes and optical sensors and crystalline matrices. That was always the human dream. Not to conquer the galaxy, but to connect it. To build something where every species could contribute their strengths and help everyone else succeed. The testing chamber continued its impossible scenario, throwing every challenge it could generate at Jake's network. And the network continued to adapt, learn, and grow stronger. It had become more than the sum of its parts, just as Jake had always known it would. As the demonstration continued, Jake realized that his simple class assignment had become something much larger. He had not just built a communication system. He had shown the galaxy a new way to think about cooperation, community, and the power of working together toward a common goal. 3 weeks after the demonstration, Jake Morrison found himself sitting in the most important meeting room on Kepler Station. Around the polished metal table sat representatives from every major species in the Galactic Council. The Xanthari delegation had brought their finest mathematicians. The Quartz collective hummed in harmonies that spoke of deep consideration. Even the mysterious Voidwalkers had sent an observer, their dark form flickering at the edge of perception. At the head of the table, Chancellor Mordoon of the Galactic Engineering Council studied the reports that had been flooding in from universities across known space. Jake's network had been tested, analyzed, and replicated on dozens of worlds. Every test confirmed what seemed impossible just a month ago. Morrison, the Chancellor began, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into Standard Galactic. Your class project has created quite a disturbance in our understanding of large-scale engineering. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had expected to receive his grade and maybe some recognition for innovative thinking. He had not expected to be summoned before the leaders of galactic civilization. Dr. Rodriguez sat beside him, offering silent support. She had been fielding calls from research institutions, government agencies, and private corporations for weeks. Everyone wanted to understand how a human student had accidentally revolutionized communication theory. The reports are remarkable, continued Chancellor Mordoon. Your network has been tested under conditions that would destroy conventional systems. Yet it continues to improve with each challenge. Our scientists are calling it impossible. Professor, Vextai activated a holographic display showing test results from across the galaxy. The Rigel Institute reports 30% improved efficiency after simulated disasters. The Centauri Defense Network shows adaptive responses to enemy jamming that exceed all previous capabilities. Most disturbing, the network appears to be developing communication protocols we did not program into it. A ripple of concern passed through the assembled delegates. Self-improving technology was the stuff of nightmares for most species. They had all heard stories of artificial intelligences that grew beyond their creator's control. Jake raised his hand tentatively. If I may explain, the network is not developing intelligence, it is developing community. The Chancellor's translator paused, apparently struggling with the concept. Please elaborate, Morrison. Each node shares information about what works and what does not work. Over time, the network learns the most efficient ways to handle different types of communication. But it is not thinking like an individual intelligence. It is cooperating like a community. The Centauri delegate, Dr. Synthesis, spoke for the first time. The distinction you draw is unclear. Learning and adaptation are hallmarks of intelligence. Jake thought carefully about how to explain something that seemed obvious to him but revolutionary to everyone else. Dr. Synthesis, when your people work together on a problem, do you become a single intelligence, or do you remain individuals who share knowledge? We remain individuals, of course, but we coordinate our efforts for maximum efficiency. Exactly. My network does the same thing. Each node remains a simple communication device, but they coordinate their efforts and share knowledge, just like people working together on a project. The Void Walker representative spoke for the first time, their voice carrying harmonics that made everyone in the room feel slightly uneasy. This approach contradicts fundamental principles. Complexity reduces reliability. Multiple components increase failure probability. That is true for independent systems, Jake replied, but not for cooperative systems. When components help each other, complexity becomes redundancy. More parts mean more backup options when something goes wrong. Chancellor Mordun studied the holographic displays showing network performance data. Morrison, the Council has reviewed your work extensively. We have a proposal to make. Jake felt his stomach drop. He had heard stories about what happened when the Galactic Council became interested in someone's research. Most of those stories did not end well for the researcher. We want to offer you a position as Director of Emergent Network Technologies, a new department we are creating specifically to explore your approach. Your assignment would be to develop galaxy-spanning communication networks based on your cooperative principles. The room fell silent as Jake processed what he had just heard. They were offering him one of the most important engineering positions in known space, and he was only 22 years old. Chancellor, I am honored by the offer, but I have one condition. Dr. Rodriguez looked at him with alarm. Negotiating with the Galactic Council was not something students typically survived. What condition? Chancellor Morden asked, his tone neutral but dangerous. I want my classmates from Professor Vextaya's course to be part of the team, all of them. The Chancellor's translator worked for several seconds before producing an output. You wish to include alien students in this human project? It is not a human project, Jake said firmly. It is a cooperative project. My network works because different components contribute different strengths. A team of only humans would be like a network of only one type of node. It would work, but it would not be as good as a diverse network. He stood and moved to the holographic display, highlighting different aspects of his network design. Zara's mathematical precision could optimize the routing algorithms. Resonance's harmonic understanding could improve signal clarity. Clax's structural knowledge could make the physical nodes more durable. The Hive Mind Collective could help develop better distributed processing protocols. Jake turned back to face the assembled delegates. You asked me to build a communication tower, and I built a network instead. Now you are asking me to build a galactic communication system. I want to build a galactic community. The delegates exchanged glances, their various forms of nonverbal communication creating a symphony of clicks, harmonics, and flickering lights. Finally, Chancellor Morden spoke. Your condition is acceptable, Morrison. But understand that failure will reflect poorly on your species' reputation in galactic affairs. Understood. But I believe success will show what is possible when different species work together instead of competing. 6 months later, Jake stood in the center of a massive engineering complex on the neutral world of Haven. Around him, his former classmates worked at stations designed for their specific physiologies and thinking patterns. Zara calculated optimal node placement with Zenthari precision. Resonance-tuned frequency harmonics that made the entire facility sing. Clax tested hardware that could survive planet-killing disasters. The first phase of the Galactic Cooperative Network was nearly ready for activation. Instead of replacing existing communication systems, it would enhance them, connecting every world in known space through a web of mutual support and shared knowledge. Dr. Rodriguez visited regularly, watching with pride as her former student managed the most ambitious engineering project in galactic history. During one visit, she found Jake reviewing test results with obvious satisfaction. Any regrets about turning a simple class assignment into a career-defining moment? She asked. Jake smiled as he watched his diverse team solve problems that no single species could handle alone. My grandfather always said that the best solutions come from bringing different people together. I think he would be proud to see how far we can take that idea. On the main display, the network status showed thousands of nodes across hundreds of worlds, all working together to create something greater than the sum of their parts. It was more than a communication system. It was proof that cooperation could achieve what competition never could. Jake had been asked to build a tower. Instead, he had built a foundation for a truly united galaxy, one connection at a time.